And now I'd like to introduce Ed Kolskar, who is representing Spray Lakes Sawmills. And if you know Cochrane, you likely know Spray Lakes Sawmills. They have been part of this community for over 80 years. They are an integral part of this community. And Ed is going to talk to us about how they really utilize 100% of what they forest and how they replant, and that's very impressive as an organization. I've had the privilege to work with Spray Lakes. I know the owner, Barry, and he is above and beyond a gentleman at the highest measure. So Ed, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this opportunity. Boy, that last talk, this is an incredibly hard act to follow. I was wondering if someone else could maybe come up and do it, and maybe I'd go later, but incredible talks actually all day so far today. We thank you for this opportunity. We're kind of going from global to local. And I welcome this opportunity to introduce you to Spray Lake Sawmills, a family-owned and operated company. How many people thought there would be a modern, medium-sized sawmill in the middle of Cochrane? And anybody that, you know, I did meet a few people at lunch, and they're like, oh, where are you guys located? Right here in Cochrane. And it was a surprise to some of these people. But I'm going to talk about some of the innovation that we've undertaken over the years to ensure that as a company we're sustainable, but also to ensure that the forest is sustainable as well. Because like the title says, the forest is our future. As a wood products company, if we don't have a thriving, growing, healthy forest, we don't have a future as a forest products company. So, like it says on the slide there, family-owned and operated, 79 years. Spray Lake Sawmills was established in 1943 by Chester Melsness, and there was reference to Barry Melsness, who is his son, so Barry's second-generation owner of the company. 79 years, it's a modern sawmill producing lumber for home building, construction, that type of thing. But we also have as side products that come out of the process, pulp chips that go to British Columbia, agricultural fence posts. You know, we take that small part of the top of the tree, turn that into an agricultural fence post. We have pressure treated products. And then something we're very proud of is landscaping reclamation product lines that we market through Top Spray. And the reason we're so proud of that is that truly made us 100% utilization with the establishment of Top Spray and those innovative products that were developed with Top Spray. It was always a dream of Chester Melsness that in the sawmilling business that at some point we would achieve 100% utilization. Many of you probably remember the old beehive burners and those types of things that used to burn a lot of the wood residues that would come out of the sawmilling process. We started early in the game of trying to achieve that 100% utilization. And, you know, we're proud to say that back in around 1998, we did achieve 100% utilization. So when my woodlands team, when we bring those logs into the mill, 100% of that log has a product. We have not used our burner since about 1998. Another thing that was alluded to with Barry is community support. Back in the early days of sawmilling, we used to take the sawmill to the forest. And then in late 60s, we started reversing that. We started bringing the bush mills and centralizing those in a central location. That way we could have more stable employment, we could become part of the community and establish ourselves. And so Spray Lake Sawmills, they moved their 2 bush mills, moved those into Cochrane 1969, 1970, and developed the first non-portable first sawmill. It was up and running by 1974 in Cochrane. So Cochrane and Spray Lake Sawmills have certainly grown together over all these years. It's allowed us to become very much involved with the community. There's the Spray Lake Sawmills Family Sports Center. There's the Legacy Field out at Bow Valley High School. We also contribute annually to things like the Stars Air Ambulance, the Cochrane Boys and Girls Club, the Housing or Cochrane Society for Housing Options. Interesting enough, a few years ago when Callaway Park was looking at upgrading their log ride, we partnered with Callaway Park at that time and upgraded the log ride, and it was all built around a sawmill theme. So, you know, that allows us to reach out and provide education on some of the things we're doing in terms of forest management to some of the young folks that actually come out to Callaway Park, a real positive partnership between us. And like I said, Barry is very much a part of the community and believes in giving back to the community and region. And in any given year, there's probably at least 50 groups that benefit from Barry's generosity. I'm going to switch a little bit now to the forestry side of the business. When we look at forest management, we've developed over the years something we call a sustainable forest management system. It's a system of managing the forest, and we're third-party certified through an international organization, international certification body called the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. They come out and they audit our operation every year to make sure that we're following and implementing our sustainable forest management system as we've indicated in all our plans. And as well, we certainly have government oversight, making sure we do what we say we're going to do as well. The system is based on providing basically 3 broad values. We've got economic values out there. Certainly, we want to continue to bring those logs in and turn them into economic products. There's recognition for ecological values out there, the plants, the animals, those types of, the water, those types of things that are out there. And there's social values. How many people here recreate out in the forest? Mountain bikers, hikers, kayakers, etc. Absolutely. And so we try and develop our plans based on what we call a 3-legged stool. And if we were to put a greater emphasis on any one of those values, then you'd be out of balance. And that's kind of how we try and plan our system. The challenge we have is the forests in southern Alberta, and for that matter, all of Alberta, are fire origin forests, which means all the vegetation, the animals, the forest itself has adapted over time through repeated fire cycles. We had a specialist come in and do a fire regime study for our forests here in southern Alberta. Can anybody guess how often the forests in southern Alberta, how often they would have burnt over? Any numbers out there? 40 years. 80 years. That's actually, you're both right. Those are close. Often when I ask that question, I get numbers like, every 500 years but certainly she found that a lot of the area in southern Alberta burned as often as actually every 35 years. Other areas of the forest she found would burn somewhere around that 60 to 70 years. And she did find some areas in the forest, some of the higher elevation, more isolated valleys that may be burnt about every 100 years. What she didn't find was any fire cycles in southern Alberta greater than 100 years. So we do have a challenge ahead of us is we've gotten very good at fighting forest fires, and we've also had some favorable conditions that have helped that. And so now we've had about 50 years of successful fire suppression. And so we've effectively removed that major disturbance event out of the forests. And there are ecological consequences to doing that. Because a lot of, like I said, a lot of the plants and animals that are out in the forest have evolved with that kind of regular disturbance event type system. So the question we move forward is how do we manage for some of these natural ecological values in the absence of fire? Or maybe we let fires just kind of take over again and run the course. Certainly there's challenges with going back to a let it burn policy. If you're looking at the forest and those three sets of values, ecological values, social values, economic values, you could certainly reestablish a lot of the ecological values through a burn policy, but then you'd be losing your economic and a lot of your social values as well. And as well, we have got a lot of people that have built up against the forest. There's now a lot of people recreating in the forest, so certainly there's a lot of risk with wildfire as well to human safety and some of the properties out there. So what we've looked at is, we've made that statement, forestry and forest management is both renewable and sustainable. So we've taken our timber harvesting that's been going on, like I said, since 1943 as part of Spray Lake Sawmills. And we've developed that system to try and balance those economic values. So reintroduce disturbance back into the landscape. Our disturbance is timber harvesting. We are cutting the forest down, but we're doing it in ways now such as patches that we've, traditionally, if you've seen some of the really old harvesting, and particularly in northern Alberta, and you saw some of those checkerboards and things like that, we've certainly now have our harvest areas that mimic natural patterns on the landscape, similar patterns to what you would see if a fire went through. The one thing we do is we also develop a strategic level plan called a forest management plan. And that plan models timber harvesting, timber regrowth over a 200-year period to ensure that the harvest level that we're at today is sustainable. So we model that out over 200 years to make sure that we're not taking too much of the forest today, that at the level we're harvesting today, that can be sustained for 200 years. The other thing we do as part of that plan is it's not just about removing the trees. We look at, for example, different wildlife species, what we call management indicator species. We look at their habitat needs, and we can also build those into those models and model those out over 200 years as well to ensure that not only can we remove those trees, but we also got that habitat for those different wildlife species sustainable for over 200 years as well. And then we take that plan and we operationalize it. We turn it into on-the-ground operations. And we're very much aware, especially in the eastern slopes here, the importance of water. A lot of what we do is to make sure that the water is protected so that the water continues to run clean, that the streams run clean. We've got downstream of the forest, we've got agricultural interests, we've got all sorts of cities like the city of Calgary. So protecting water is utmost importance. And we do that by minimizing ground disturbance when we do our operations, and also through our best management practices around how we conduct our road building, how we build our bridges with box cribs, those kinds of things. And through our international certification, because we do spend a lot of time focusing on those areas, it's actually been written in some of our audit reports as a notable practice in how we conduct our stream crossing activity. Another thing we can talk about a little bit is the phrase is keeping the air fresh, but as we know, forests are important for taking carbon dioxide in and releasing oxygen. The one thing that happens with an aging forest is as the forest ages, it does start to slow down its growth, and therefore it starts to take less carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And as well, if that forest does burn, then that's an immediate release of CO2 into the atmosphere. So by coming in and harvesting, we can remove some of those older forests, those stands. We can turn it into lumber, store that carbon. You hear carbon storage and how some industries, like the energy industry, is talking about carbon storage. The forest industry, we've done that for years. That lumber is storing all that carbon, goes into a home for 100 plus years. And then by coming in with prompt reforestation, we can renew that growth and start that whole process of again, the forest and all the associated vegetation, taking the CO2 out and turning it into that ever valuable oxygen. In fact, we're coming up to our tree planting season this year. I'll throw one more question out. Anybody have a guess how many trees we plant in a year? 100,000. This June we'll be planting 3.3 million trees. And it's an amazing exercise in logistics. We joke around with our silviculture forester about how he plans for 11 years for 11 months for 1 month of work. But it truly is an exercise in logistics to grow those 3.3 million trees, get them out onto the ground with a couple of our great tree planting contractors, and in about a 3.5 week, 4 week period, those 3.3 million trees will be planted. And that's to supplement all the natural reforestation that we've got going on out there. The next thing is biodiversity. Again, by going in and harvesting some of the older stands, the idea is you get a broader distribution of forest age classes across the landscape. So now instead of having a whole bunch of forest of one age, you'll get forests of multiple ages. Some animals and plants really love old forests, but there's other animals and plants out there that actually need clearings. There's another set of animals and plants that like younger forests, some that like mid-age forests. So you can actually help the natural diversity out there by reintroducing disturbance and getting that broader age class distribution across the landscape. And that also leads to a healthier forest. Again, multiple age classes. It makes the forest more resilient to insect, disease attacks, those types of things, and can also, again, reduce that wildfire risk. I'm going to take just a few seconds just to talk about another innovation that we've done. Often we're criticized for our harvesting activity because the harvest area with the logging debris is perceived as a mess. We've left a mess. It doesn't look like a golf course, doesn't look all manicured. We've left debris in the block. And we do that on purpose. A lot of the industry in Alberta still does something called roadside processing, where they cut the tree in the harvest area, they bring it to the road, they take the branches and tops off roadside, haul the log away, and then they pile all that roadside tops and branches and they burn it, which isn't really a good thing. We looked at our situation down here in southern Alberta, and in 1998 we started something called stump side processing. So what we do is we go out into the block, we still cut that tree down in the block, but now we send that processor out into the block as well. So that processor goes and cuts the top and the branches off right out in the harvest area, leaves it at the stump, and then just brings the log in for hauling to the mill. It costs us a little more to do that, but there's a lot of ecological benefit to doing that. With our area down here, Chinook winds have always been a challenge for reforestation. So leaving that debris on site provides moist microsites for the young seedlings to grow and establish. We're also leaving all those cones out there with natural seed. And in addition, all those nutrient-rich needles are also left out in the block, so very effective for nutrient recycling. So our reforestation efforts have been greatly enhanced by moving to that stump side processing. So I've covered off a lot of stuff real quick and just lightly. But if you are interested in any more detail on what we do, if you want to see some of our plans, our forest management plan is in excess of 1,000 pages long. So there's a lot of detail there.
Is it printed on paper?
No, it's in the digital environment. So if you go to our website, there's just a wealth of information about what we do in the mill, what we do with top spray, and what we do in the forests. And so thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. And Ed mentioned the generosity of Barry and the company. They are also a primary major sponsor of this conference. So congratulations to Spray Lakes. We have questions.
With the Rotary.
It's on, they'll control it.
Deb Sands with the Rotary Club of Calgary at Stampede Park. I was just wondering if you have any insights onto what the pine beetle is doing in terms of, are we getting anywhere in stopping the devastation of our forests from that beetle?
Yeah, we're actually part of a provincial mountain pine beetle committee. And so we meet twice a year with the Alberta government and other forest companies. Down in the south, I'll focus on the south because there is still some beetle spread in central Alberta and a little bit in the north, although it was knocked back by this last winter. In the south here, the primary area of concern is still the Bow Valley. There's still mountain pine beetle kind of moving in and out of the Bow Valley corridor. And so the Alberta government at this point does what they call their level 1 or single tree cut and burn. So they'll identify those areas by going out soon this time of year, doing survey to look for recent faders, what they call faders, trees that are turning from green to red. They'll send in ground crews to identify and confirm whether or not it was mountain pine beetle that's causing that tree mortality. And if it is, then they set up a program and they have crews that go out and do what they call individual cut and burn on those trees. So far, that's being successful. Back a number of years ago, there was a larger population coming in through the Crow's Nest Pass. We actually harvested some blocks that were considered infested at a block level, brought those trees into Cochrane under strict conditions. We had to have pheromone traps. Maybe some of you saw when we had those black traps hanging all around our yard there for a few years. They were brought in. We had to make sure we had the traps up, and all those logs had to be processed by mid-June before there was any kind of risk of beetle flight. And that seemed to be successful. And then, of course, we got a really couple of favorable winter kills, and that really knocked it back in southern Alberta. But since then, it has started to come back again. And if we do have that trend of warming winters, it could certainly become a problem again.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Amanda Sarka from the Canmore Club. And I'm curious, talking about global climate change and rapid onset disasters. Here, one of the things that we've been alerted to are large flood events. And I'm curious, after 2013, did your operations change? Did your approach change? And how does forestry play a role in mitigating or contributing to those flood events?
Yeah, thank you. The 2013 flood was generally rain on snow at higher elevations, what they call the snowpack area. We generally don't operate at that elevation. So in terms of those major flood events, we're generally operating farther down in the slopes and not in those higher elevation areas, which were the source of the floods in 2013. But one thing we do is we do recognize that there is a potential for timber harvesting to affect water yield and maybe the timing of water out of the watersheds. And when we developed that 200-year plan, we did take a model called the ECA model and modeled the harvesting of those stands in those areas over time to see if there were any potential trigger points in terms of water yield. And if there was, then we had to adjust where those stands would be taken spatially over time. So through that process, we're pretty confident that at this point we're not contributing to extra water yield, especially during the spring flood period.
Hello, Diana Frost with the Honoring Indigenous Peoples Committee. I'm just wondering if you work in consultation with any Indigenous peoples when you're preparing your management plans.
Yes, we have. We recognize that there's the Treaty 7 nations, so there's the 7 nations within Treaty 7 that we consult with, and we consulted on the broad level plan, and we also do annual consultation on our annual plans. But in addition to the consultation on our plans, we're also trying to establish relationships with those. We've actually had some very good recent success with the Tsuut'ina Nation, whereby through agreements with them, we've actually taken some timber purchased timber from the Tsuut'ina, and they actually purchased some lumber back from us for some of their needs on the nation. So we are ongoing working through those consultation processes and trying to establish those relationships.
Brian Walton, I'm with Rotary Club of Calgary at Stampede Park. This question pertains to your reforestation efforts, and I was just curious, out of those 3.5 million seedlings you plant every year, what species and where do you get them from?
Okay, that's really good. It's I'll have to be quick because it can get detailed. When we harvest an area, our entire operating area is split into what's called seed zones. So to make sure that we're putting the same genetics back into the area, we collect cones from the areas that we're harvesting. They're all cataloged by seed zone, and they're put into Smoky Lake and stored there. And then when it comes time to grow the seedlings to reforest that area, then we'll pull those specific seed lots that come from those seed zones to make sure that those seedlings go back into the area that the seeds were taken from. And so it's quite a regulated process. Our forest is about 70% lodgepole pine. So when we reforest, we look at putting back about the same percentage. So our silviculture forester will look at a stand, and if it was a pure lodgepole pine, then the planters will go out with mostly lodgepole pine seedlings. If it was a mixed lodgepole pine spruce, then they'll go in and they'll do a mixed bag plant similar to the proportion that came out of that area.
Thank you very much. Franco Savoy with the Calgary Downtown Club. Thank you for helping us understand when my brothers complain about the high price of lumber. I have a rationale for them. The question I have are over 79 years, what you've described is kind of the right way or the right ways of managing. To what degree has government regulation evolved within the overall industry? Because you were talking about your company, and I applaud for all the things you're doing, but there must be too, because not everybody's maybe not as responsible or anything.
Well, I can't speak for other provinces. I've spent my whole career since 1981 working in Alberta, forestry, and I have seen a lot of change in the regulations. So as the science tells us more and more about forest management, then companies, our best management practices, we change them, we adapt them. For example, us down here going to stump side processing in 1998. As well as looking at that, government regulations also change and adapt as we learn more and more through the research and the science. And so definitely things have changed, focuses have changed. And it's not just based on the science as well, is socially things have changed from the old days of going out and harvesting. And like I talked about, the social demands on the landscape are much, much higher, and different types of uses, mountain bike uses, off-highway vehicle uses, things that we didn't know about back when I came out of school in 1980s. So all of this has changed, and it all does shape all the ongoing. So the regulations, the ground rules we operate under with the government in Alberta, those are continually changing and to reflect both the latest in the science and the latest in social expectations.
All right. Thank you very much, Ed.
Thank you.
He's walked away on me, but Ed, that was certainly very enlightening. And what you do to forest responsibly is very, very impressive. And maybe even more so, what Barry and you do as a company for this town and for our province is exceptional. So thank you very much.